Welcome to another episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. Of course, I'm your host, JJ Kitchen. Guys, here we are on Tuesday. So caught up with work. Great to jump on here for a live stream. Going to try to do a little bit more live streams during the week, plus some recorded videos we'll be putting out, obviously, with some players. We'll be talking about those. But a number of different topics. Obviously, we've talked about Cade Bell in previous episodes, a 3-year extension. Again, they held off the University of Florida, Central Florida, and Oklahoma to hold the services of Cade Bell. That extension comes at a timely point, making sure that year 2 of the Cade Bell experience should go on. We'll talk tonight about where they can improve, how the offense improves in year 2, what's it look like at this point. But right now, there have been some players emerging so far in the first 4 practices of camp. They've had 2 non-padded practices and now 2 full padded practices, and the last 2 have really been good. Pat Narduzzi talked to the press today on a number of different players, but also a number of different players that I've heard about. We'll dive into a number of those. But as you guys always know, the show is sponsored by Colonial Beer, located at 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA, 15102. Again, the great sponsorship, the great looking can. I mean, obviously, I'm not a beer guy, but Icy Light, Pitt, Hail to Pitt, obviously. Great stuff. Your heavier beers, your lighter lagers, really good. Obviously, the can's really cool to have, obviously. That's a very cool memorabilia item to have, too. It's pretty cool to have around the house. But they also have a huge selection. You guys have certainly seen me post about it, especially on Twitter. And it's a really good place, but more importantly, great service, incredible people. Bill, everybody there, they're incredible from top to bottom. Make sure you go see Colonial Beer, located at 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA, 15102. The show is also sponsored by Thompson Law Group with Brian Thompson. Give them a call at 724-799-8404 or visit them at thompsonattorney.com. Brian Thompson is a person that I use personally. Dear friend of mine. I've known him since I was a kid. A tremendous individual. He comes from a great family, has a great family, and the amount of work he does in the community is top shelf. But more importantly, when he works with you, the client, he's a lot better than the larger law firms because Brian cares about you individually and the results that you need in the case that you're looking to have settled. Brian does a great job, but more importantly, he's extremely personable. I mean, you talk to anybody, Brian is an easy person to talk to, especially when you call him, you text him, doesn't matter. He's also a tremendous Pitt fan, season ticket holder, and quite the donator to Alliance 412 and to the University of Pittsburgh athletics, and especially football and basketball. Make sure you call Thompson Law Group with Brian Thompson. Call them at 724-799-8404 or visit them at thompsonattorney.com. Lastly, the newest one that we've talked about a number of different times on the show, the K Collection, coffee brand by Austin Kitchen. You can find his brand, which is right here. Here is the logo he has on here. Obviously, I buy the AK Espresso batch. I love to have it every morning. A number of my friends have certainly gotten it already. And again, I appreciate each and every one of you going out and buying this because obviously Austin is my younger brother, but you can tell by the last name. Again, www.thekingscraft.com. A number of different selections. Austin, it fuels him. He's gone through a number of different brands. He's looked at this one. He's been able to put together a number of different tests that he's done personally and fuels him. If it can fuel him with the Seattle Mariners being a professional athlete with the Major League Baseball team, the Seattle Mariners, it can certainly help you. It's certainly helping me every morning when I'm going to my office. The AK Espresso batch, again, a dark roast. I have it every morning. All I need is a couple cups of these, and I'm going to work till roughly like tonight, till 6:30. Left there at 6:30 tonight. You don't need more than 2. This stuff's incredible. The K Collection, coffee brand by Austin Kitchen. Again, go see them at www.thekingscraft.com. As you can imagine, Austin and I are both from Mount Lebanon, grew up in Dormont before we moved to Mount Lebanon. And I can tell you this, I work extremely hard, but Austin works even harder. And anytime you can support him, I truly appreciate it. You guys have already done a great job. And the number of you who have reached out to me already that you've bought bags, beyond appreciative. I know Austin's very appreciative. and we cannot thank you enough as a family. But now on to the fun stuff. The comment section so far, Mike Pahersky, let's go. 10 wins this year. Offensive line, much improved. We'll certainly be talking about them. Pat Narduzzi made some comments, but also things that I'm hearing when it comes to the offensive line. Pitt fan 1993, do you see the tight ends being moved and being more involved this year under year 2 of Bell? Also, what tight end do you expect to take the reins? Bart was criminally underused the last 2 seasons. We'll get into that as well. The wide receivers have a lot of upside, need to get the tight ends involved. I feel comfortable at QB1, QB2, and the linebackers and safeties. I agree. Smash the like button and subscribe and join Alliance 412. If you're over on X, head over to YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe. It's easy. It helps out with the algorithm and brings more people into the conversation. So right now, just hit the like button and hit subscribe. It certainly helps us out. First things first, the players, and I've got a number of different notes here. Players who are really started to stand out, and we're going to go over a number of them here from players that I've heard about. You guys probably have not heard about them, but emerging players in really the first 4 practices, and it's only been 4. There's 15. Remember, 15 total practices. The 15th one, obviously, is the spring game. So really 14 practices overall. But a number of different players have certainly made their names known. And by looking at my notes here from what I've heard, on the defensive line group, it seems like at this point, one of the surprising guys, emerging guys who we've wanted to hear about, we certainly talked about him on this show, Blaine Spires at the defensive end position has really had a good first 4 days of camp. It's really good when you start to see an emerging guy so far when it comes to spring, because you want to be able to get these guys down in terms of the actual terminology of the defense, learning the defense, because at that point, when a player understands the defense or understands the offense at that point, they're able to play faster and they're not thinking as much. They're not being able to go out in the field. They're not thinking of where they need to be because that player eventually then slows down. A lot of times you'll see that with new head football coaches or new coordinators, like what we saw last year with Cade Bell, especially during the early portion of camp, or if you have a whole new position group or new players coming in. That could certainly happen. But Blaine Spires is a guy that has certainly popped up. Joey Zielinski, another defensive end who has really looked the part physically. I've been told numerous times the Pitt Ironworks has done tremendous amounts of work there, and you guys have probably saw my tweet roughly about 3 weeks ago talking about, Mike Stacchiotti and his whole crew. Stack has done a hell of a job. Those guys overall have done a hell of a job. That's why I tweeted it out, because the players have certainly told me how great they are. They certainly need a lot more love. Another player who has really developed from a true freshman to a redshirt freshman, and I expect to have a big year in terms of actual production, a player who will be on the field this year, Jasir Whittington, the former defensive tackle, former 4-star, right out of here in PA. He's the guy who has really taken into the reins. Tim Dowse, defensive line coach, has really done a good job of developing him up to this point. We wanted to see a little bit of a jump. Obviously, we'll watch the games, the spring game, and obviously, too, the games during the year. We'll see how much that materializes, because sometimes you can hear a lot of this stuff and it doesn't come to fruition. But from this point, Jasir Whittington has really turned it on, and it starts with the knowledge of the defense and allowing him to play faster. And it's really working to his advantage to this point. And then, as you can imagine, Francis Breu, I really do believe, guys, the starting 2 defensive tackles will be Nick James and Sean Fitzsimmons. I think Sean Fitzsimmons is ahead of Nick James right now. I think Sean Fitzsimmons is going to have a hell of a year, and he's going to be fully healthy this year. Knock on wood here. Knock on wood. He's going to have a hell of a year if he stays healthy, man. He's got all the talent in the world. We saw it when he got healthy, came back last year. Now it's time for him to truly stay healthy and really jump on board to the point where he's able to take that next step from here to here, because he's going to need to lead that group, because it's a very young group. Okay. And while we sit here today, we talk about a number of different guys where, again, Sean Fitzsimmons, Nick James, Francis Breu, Jasir Whittington, Isaiah O'Neal, Ty Uhas. That's 6 guys right there. But you want to see these guys in the game. It's great to finally do it in practice, but then now it needs to take that next point when we go towards the games, and we'll certainly be more critical at that point. But those 4 guys, you look at Sean Fitzsimmons, Nick James, at the 2 starting guys, but the guys who have been emerging and really solidifying their name into the 2 deep, is really Jasir Whittington and Francis Breu. And again, Francis has been there. He played a ton last year. This year, you want to see him take that next step. I thought he did really well. He certainly had a number of pressures last year. He had a number of moments of being a freshman. We certainly saw a number of it early on in the season. As a true freshman coming into college football, you would imagine the first 2, 3, 4 games, it's quite a learning curve. I mean, you watched the first 4 games of the Pitt season. The defensive line for Pitt was just absolutely atrocious. I didn't think it was good at all, and there was a lot of criticism, as there should have been. I really expect that to really be tightened up. And from what I've been hearing, this year 2 of this group, this solid core group, should really start to take mold and start to really take that next level. I mean, heck, even Pat Narduzzi talked about this week how this group is a lot better than last year's group. There was a lot of expectations for a guy like Chief Borders. He said certainly did not live up to that. A guy who was certainly paid at a high level, but did not produce. Nate Matlack, a guy, the PFF grades, he certainly had a lot of pressures, but never finished the plays. It was the most frustrating player to watch in college football last year because he was around the play every time, but just never finished it. So it'll be fun to see how those guys progress. Now, to the linebacker room. 2 names, obviously, we know the names from the previous year. Oh, my allergies are killing me today. From the previous year, Rasheem Biles, you can imagine he's right there. In the Mike position, Braylon Lovelace has really taken hold of that position at the Mike position. And then at the star position, obviously, returning All-American Kyle Lewis. Behind him, 2 guys that have really started to step up, and you're saying, okay, hey, here's where the depth really starts to fill and really starts to get a hold of. The first name, Jeremiah Marcelin. Jeremiah Marcelin was a true freshman last year out of Florida. A guy, again, certainly used the Pitt Ironworks to his advantage, has really gained a lot of mass and a lot of size. He will be a player on the 2 deep this year. He continues to make a name. He understands the defense and is playing at a much faster pace than what he was last year. I think, obviously, with Jordan Bass, a guy who had a lot of those repetitions last year, really took a lot of those from last year from a number of different guys behind them. Jeremiah Marcelin will be a guy who I think can play the Mike position or the will position, the weak side linebacker. I think he'd be a great middle linebacker, to be honest with you. And I think it's where he's practicing at for the most part right now. The other linebacker that's really stepped up is Cameron Lindsey, the former 4-star. He'll be a redshirt freshman this year, former 4-star out of Aliquippa, Whippeal hometown hero. He's done a tremendous job. He was this past weekend, he was one of the special teams players of the week. He continues to get better. He is certainly on the 2 deep as well. So you have those starting 3 plus Jeremiah Marcelin plus Cameron Lindsey. Some guys will certainly fill their names in there. I think David Bruton will be a guy that you watch in there. Cameron Lindsey can play really all 3 positions, in my opinion. He can play certainly the Mike. He can play the will. If they wanted him to play the star position, he certainly can play the star. He can cover. He's got great speed and great physicality up front. When it comes to the safety room, Jaden Bonsu, when he first came to Pitt, was a guy who was working with the linebackers. They wanted to see him in action there. I think he did a really good job learning there, but now he's really with the safeties, and I think he's going to be a tremendous safety. He's certainly making a name back there. By starting at linebacker, he was able to see during the wintertime, understanding the defense, now working in at linebacker, now back to safety, where I think will be his natural position. More of it better for his size, his speed, his athleticism. I think he can certainly be a strong safety or a free safety. I think he can play either or. He can certainly play down in the box. I think with his size, though, I think he'd be better served at the free safety position. But even if he needed to play strong safety, he can certainly play in the box and really make a really instant impact on Pitt's defense. Again, he's a former top 150 recruit, transfer from Ohio State. I expect him to see a number of different playing time this year. And as you can imagine, Cruz Brookins, the starter, in my opinion, in the box as the strong safety will be Cruz Brookins. He's a guy that you saw him take a lot of steps forward last year. You want to see those next steps take forward this year. Jesse Anderson, they've talked about him, how he's starting to have a good camp, but you want to see more out of him. I think he needs some more progression that's currently in there. I think there's more to be desired there. He continues to learn at a good rate, but you want to get him to a certain level. I think those starting 3 safeties at this point, or the 3 that really in that rotation, are Javon McIntyre, returning starter from last year, Cruz Brookins, and now Jason Bonsu. I think those 3 guys have really solidified themselves. The other guys behind them, like Jesse Anderson, those are the guys that you want to see where do they really place out at this point. And again, we're 4 practices in. We'll figure that out as we start to go through spring. When we hit the portal afterwards, those will certainly be important. And in the wide receiver room, this has been a really good one this week. A guy whose really name has popped off the sheet, I should say, is Zion Fowler-El, a guy who's been here for multiple years, in 2 different systems, obviously, from the previous with Frank Signetti, now Cade Bell. You wanted to see him take that next step forward. Pat Narduzzi has talked about in recent weeks about his maturity level. He's finally matured. He's understanding what he needs, taking care of his body, understanding the playbook. And so far this camp, he has really started to turn into that guy that we thought he could be. The first 2 years were a lot of disappointment to where, it took a lot of maturity to get to that point. It took a lot of time to get him to that point where you start to see those flashes. And you want to see those flashes, but now what we want to see is not flashes, but consistency. We want to see consistency to this point. We're starting to see that consistency, but we'll see if that takes through all the way to the point of fall camp and then into the season, because you want to see obviously the production go from spring, summer, summer OTAs to the fall camp to the actual season. But so far, he has been a name that has been popping off the list. The second and third guy, obviously, you guys know about Kenny Johnson. I don't need to talk about him. He's wide receiver number 1. He will be wide receiver number 1 going into the season. But another name to watch for in the wide receiver room, Andy Jean. Andy Jean, the University of Florida, former 4-star recruit, transferred in from the University of Florida, has certainly taken a hold of this offense. One of the things that he talked about when he first transferred to Pitt was the fact that he wanted to be able to really go more extend the field, not just be a possession receiver, but to utilize his speed, utilize his size, and start to really push the field, especially pushing the ball downfield like Eli Holstein loves to do and how Cade Bell loves to do this. I think he'll be a very good attribute, and he's certainly taken a hold of that offense so far and has really not hit a wall yet through 4 practices. The next one, Deuce Spann. He has had, again, the transfer from the Florida State University. He's had a turbulent career. I mean, a guy that certainly does not have a lot of numbers put up really anywhere. He was a projected starter. He was a starter day 1 in the beginning of the season last year. Unfortunately, went through an injury. He's had a good camp so far, and I think that's great to hear. The biggest thing is just keeping him healthy. That's really the main factor. But more importantly is when he gets to the season, does it stay in effect? That's what you want to see. And I think that will probably be more, for me personally, I'll be more critical as the season begins or when fall camp begins, when you start to face other teams. But you want to see these guys continue to take these steps. Spring ball is finding out really who's on the boat and who do you find out to say, hey, you know what, they're not on the 2 deep. Maybe we push them to the portal. We go out and find more guys. Now that comes at a cost too. You go into the portal after spring camp, guys are certainly going to cost a lot more money. I see Pitt going to the portal after spring camp and going after a tight end, one more offensive lineman if it's there, a bigger running back if it's there. I think those 3 positions and potentially a cornerback, Rashad Battle right now, I believe he was one of the guys that was recently injured before spring camp. He's going through, obviously he's not going to do really anything in the spring, a lot like a Derek Davis, like Pat Narduzzi has talked about, they're recovering. The biggest thing that you look for right now, okay, they understand the offense, they understand the scheme, and they're starting to play at a high level. And you saw a guy like Jake Overman, who's projected to be the starting tight end at this point, talk about how this year 2 looks a lot better than year 1 under the Cade Bell offense because they know what's expected. They know what it's supposed to look like. They understand the expectation and the standard of where it's at. Last year, the last 4 or 5 games, I don't think they hit that standard, to say the least. The offense was not up tempo. There was some questionable play calling, now I understand too, numerous injuries. No one wants to talk about that. That's a fact. I mean, at the end of the day, some guys can't go up tempos like the other guys can. I think Pitt has a lot more depth this year up front. We'll go into the offensive line group here in a second. But across the board, there are a number of guys who can certainly play at this level. And it's good to hear so far that Zion Fowler-El, Andy Jean, and Deuce Spann have started to really elevate themselves with 2 guys like a Kenny Johnson, like a Raphael Poppy Williams, that gets you 5 guys right there. And then obviously Tyreek Robinson has done a good job to this point as well. So you want to see them guys as well continue to reach that level and continue to boost it as we go into the summer OTAs and fall camp. Now, on the offensive line, it was pretty cool. You heard today Pat Narduzzi talk about how the starting left tackle at this point, who I would project to be in there, and we've talked about this in previous shows, Jeff Percy looks to be the starting left tackle going into the season, a transfer in from the University of Michigan. As you can imagine, Michigan has done a tremendous job of recruiting offensive linemen. Believe it or not, Michigan and Pitt really look at the same players for the most part and who they want to bring in. So he certainly fits the mold of what Pitt was looking for. To back him up, a guy has been working there has been Kendall Stanley. He's been working at the left tackle position as well. He can certainly bump inside if he needed to. He can play. He has a versatility. At the left guard position, so far in camp, it looks like Keith Guvia, the transfer out of the University of Richmond, has taken a hold of that spot right now. He continues to work at the left guard position. They certainly want them, and those guys to really get developed at those positions to where they're comfortable at it. So when the season comes around, summer comes around, fall camp, they know what they're doing and they can play at a really fast and high level. I don't think that from what I was hearing, there's obviously more growth and progression that they need to have. Keith Guvia, who I think can be a really good offensive lineman at Pitt, has certainly had rave reviews coming from the University of Richmond. I think that the biggest thing at this point and really in spring camp, is that you want to learn the scheme. You want to learn schematically where you need to be and how you need to perform at this level. So he's getting there, but a guy that really pops off the list. Lyndon Cooper at the center position, you expect him to be back there again. Caleb Holmes to be able to back him up there. Right guard, B.J. Williams, returning starter from last year. And at the right tackle position, Ryan Bayer, really in a position where he's talked about how he feels better at the right tackle position, a place where he feels better. Jackson Brown, a guy who can play guard or tackle. I think he's a bigger guy. I think he can play both, to be quite honest with you. But I think he can play tackle, especially at right or left tackle. And the same thing goes for Isaiah Montgomery. So, I mean, you're really rotating in 8 or 9 guys that really have depth pieces. You have really Ryan Hartman. He's back there as well. A guy can back it up. Terrence Enos, a guy who's certainly there, has plenty of repetitions. He can jump in there if he needs to. And some younger guys that are currently back there as well. That'll be fun to watch. So that's really the offensive group from jumping up there. And then one of the really surprising names here, Eli Holstein, obviously the starter. He's done a great job to this point. He continues to progress. I think at this point, early on in spring, you want him to keep progressing. He has talked about taking a better leadership role, being more vocal. That's been a very good thing so far. I think his play can continue to climb, and as it has been, Cade Bell has talked about that. Julian Duggar has really jumped into the number 2 spot. I think the repetitions this year will certainly help him out, to say the least, as he finally gets necessary repetitions that he did not get last year. But a name that has emerged in that room is Mason Heinchel, the true freshman from out of Ohio. And let me tell you, from what I've been told, they think that he's going to be a superstar. This kid has it. It's almost like early on when you see a guy and you just know how they're performing at this level. When the first full day of practice comes on and he's making quick decisions down the football field, a very strong and accurate arm, that's good shit. So he's obviously going to be quarterback number 3. But I think that Pitt has a strong 1-2-3 punch. And I think that if Mason had to go in the middle of the year, I'd be comfortable with it. If Julian Duggar had to go in, I'd be comfortable with it. And I think those guys have started to really solidify themselves at this point. The 4th quarterback, I think, would be Bo Jackson, walk on. And then David Lynch is certainly a walk on, and he's certainly still there as well. Go through some of the comments here. Again, guys, down below, if you want to get your question to the top, the super chat button is down below. Make a small donation to the podcast, and we'll certainly get it up on the screen. Holstein sounds confident. Seems like he's gotten a lot better on the offense, knows what to do and improve on. I feel like he's in for a big year. Adam, I do believe he is too. This is a great question here by Pitt Fan 1993. Do you see the tight ends being more involved this year under year 2 of Bell? Also, what tight end do you expect to take the reins? Bart was criminally underused in the last 2 seasons. Well, right now, I think the 3 tight ends in that room, and the starter will be right now Jake Overman, who came in from Oregon State last year, transferred from Oregon State. Turned out to be a damn good tight end. I think he was very reliable, a guy who could certainly make contested catches, a great blocking tight end as well. I think he is the guy that's really in for the starting tight end position right now. Jake Renda and Malachi Thomas, 2 guys behind him that are certainly battling for that number 2 spot. Malachi Thomas was as a freshman freshman All-American last year when he came as a true freshman. He'll be a guy to watch. Those three guys are going to compete. As of right now, I would expect 95%. If we went into the season right now, 95% positive that Jake Overman would be the starting tight end. And if you remember during the year, the tight end position, rarely ever were they on the line to block. I mean, there were the majority of the time they were out wide. And to your point, Pitt fan 1993, I agree. I thought, Gavin Bartholomew was underused the majority of the time. I think there was design plays for certain players. You saw, C.J. Lee step up in certain areas. Raphael Poppy Williams, Kanate Mumfield. I think when you had a number of those targets out there, it made sense. And then you had an All-American out of the backfield and Desmond Reed. Sometimes guys get lost in the shuffle. I think that personally, I think Gavin Bartholomew could have been used a lot more. He's certainly he's certainly an NFL tight end. He will get drafted within the first 3 days of the NFL draft coming up in April. He will be a damn good player at the next level. He certainly has a size and football IQ. But you want to see more of it this year. I want to see more of the tight end usage over the middle of the field, not just everything on the outside. We did have a number of slant routes. Cade Bells in the early portion of the year really started to use the inside portion of the hashes. I thought he did a really good job of that. But again, you started to see a number of different deficiencies on Pitt's offense after the injury started to occur. When you had the quarterback position go in and out of injuries, obviously you had Holstein go out a number of times with a concussion. I think that was detrimental. The offensive line was certainly shuffled quite a bit. We had 2 or 3 injuries on the offensive line at a time. That never helped. Gavin Bartholomew was out at one point. Kanate Mumfield and other wide receivers were out at some point. It was like putting together pieces. Desmond Reed was hurt at one point. The progression you want to see at this point is guys stay healthy. You need to stay healthy. And that kind of goes into the next topic of what I want to see under year 2 of Bell. There are plenty of ways that Cade Bell can be a lot better of a play caller. And if you watched Pat Narduzzi this morning, talked about how it's so important for him to go to that next progression. And Cade Bell really spent the offseason looking at the offense saying, okay, here's what we did well. Here's what we did bad. Here's how I can improve as a play caller. You love to hear that. I personally don't think that we saw that with a Frank Signetti. It was really the same thing over and over again. Really no creativity, very, very bland, very predictable of what they were going to do. That was a number of different times that you saw that. It reminded me a lot of like a Sean Watson. Those guys were really the same thing from what I remember. And I think that when you look at this team on offense, to get to that next level, the play caller needs to be better this year, which I think he will. And again, we held off Florida, we held off UCF, and we held off Oklahoma. I know that for a fact. And Florida was really the top echelon. Florida was really number one, pushing to bring him on as a co-offensive coordinator. That name was being pushed a lot. And I know quite a bit of people that reached out to me from down there that told us and even showed me text messages that said, hey, there's a conversation going on here, which was nerve-wracking for a little bit. And I didn't go on and bring that out to a lot of people, but we did talk about how names were going out there. Brent Venable certainly had a conversation with him out of the University of Oklahoma. He had a wide variety of guys he wanted to bring in. But Pitt did a good job of giving the extension there and making him a top end paid ACC coordinator, offensive coordinator in the ACC, which is really important. But under year 2, I do expect the tight end to be used more. Now, you want to use a tight end more, but don't solidify yourself to where, well, we need to focus on the tight end. You still have great assets out there. I think you guys will be pretty shocked of what you see when it comes to Deuce Spann, who runs a 4.4. Raphael Poppy Williams, where people were saying that he dropped a lot of passes last year, including myself. I was very critical. Raphael Poppy Williams had torn ligaments in both thumbs. That kind of shit can cost you when you're trying to catch a football. C.J. Lee will be back healthy. He's not going to play anything this spring, obviously coming back from a gruesome injury, but he'll be ready for the fall. Kenny Johnson will get a lot more touches this year. You want to make sure that certain guys are getting their touches. It's up to Jake Overman and those guys get open as well. Schematically, you want to get certain guys open. But if you're bigger guys like Kenny Johnson, Deuce Spann, Katarius Hicks, Katarius Blue Hicks, those guys, and Hicks will be in the slot. He's a guy that's 5'10". He's got a lot of speed to him. He's going to be fun to watch this year. I think he'll take that next progression because he likes Cade Bell's offense and he's very used to it because of the high school years. He'll be a guy to watch. I truly believe there will be a number of guys that step up. My biggest thing is don't force it to anybody. If someone's open, throw it to them. It's that simple. Give it the ball to your best playmakers. It's that simple. And the stack ranking, here's where they are. If they're there and you use them as safety routes, or especially too, when you're using them over the middle of the field, that's great. Use them. But don't ever force the ball on a guy to where you think you need to put it in a certain spot, because that's when mistakes start to happen. And then your quarterback starts to lose a little bit of confidence in the coordinator. Just my opinion. But great question, Pitt fan 1993. I appreciate it. WRW Pitt, is there a good, I'm going to get to the one West Virginia thing. Is there a good depth on the defensive line? I still have questions at defensive end because you haven't really seen, again, I've heard a lot of great stuff about Blaine Spires. Jaden Moore will be more of a rotational guy. I think in this first year, he's done a great job in camp, but I think he still has a little bit of ways to go to earn the starting position. Blaine Spires has really stepped up. Joey Zielinski has really stepped up. That's great. Jaden Moore has done a good job. Nate Temple has done a good job. I expect right now he's probably rolling with the number ones. Jimmy Scott returns. Maverick Rossio. I mean, you got 6 or 7 guys right there, but you got to see it in a game. I want to see it in a game first. That's where my question lies. Right now I can tell you, we have a lot of depth, which I think at this point, if those guys end up panning out, yeah, we have a lot of depth. Do I think if there's a defensive end out there that will make a difference in Pitt's team, do they sign that guy? I think so, because it adds more depth and more guys that have repetitions, because that's who you're going to find out in the portal in this second portal era. The defensive tackle room, yes, we have a lot of. Me personally, I can say right now, we have talent there and we have depth. Nick James and Sean Fitzsimmons. Sean Fitzsimmons being number 1. Sean Fitzsimmons and Nick James will be your starters. Jasir Whittington and Francis Breu. Francis Breu will probably be number 3 because he's returning from a number of different starts he had last year. Francis Breu, number 3. Jasir Whittington, number 4. Isaiah O'Neal, the progression that I've told he's had from last year to this year, things that he was told to correct and really correct from last year to be more productive this year, he has done. That's 5. I think there's really good 5 rotational guys right there that pop off my head that I've heard about that say, hey, we got some damn good depth there, and that we'll be able to stop the run from game 1 this year. That's what you want to see. You don't want to have last year happen where the first 4 games you're trying to, understand what the hell's going on. Those guys, I think, have done a good job, and I think that we have that depth inside. The questions are where I have, what do we truly have on the outside? And again, Jimmy Scott will be a starter. Jimmy Scott will be a starter again from last year. I think he takes another step forward for sure. Brian Thompson, thank you so much for the super chat. Of course, always appreciate the super chats, and thank you so much for the question. Will there be a different short yardage goal line package? This is a great question. Will there be a different short yardage goal line package actually utilized this year? If so, what personnel would be used, and how compared to the East-West type of plays with QB not under center last year? This is a great question, and I think a number of us, obviously I heard from numerous people during the year last year, myself included. You saw during the Clemson game, how are we not under center? When it comes to being under center, do I think that they'll have an actual play there? As of right now, I'm going to say no. I really don't think they're going to be able to go under center, or they don't want to go under center. But what will change with that, if it's on the 1-yard line, expect a guy like Julian Duggar to go into the game, because he's a dual threat guy. And from what my understanding is, from what they're bringing into the packages that they currently have now, is that Julian Duggar is an RPO specialist. He can throw it and he can run it. And when you got a guy that's 6'4", 6'5", and you heard, and then Pat Narduzzi talked about it today. You saw him in the bowl game. You saw how big he is. I guarantee you Pitt will not make that mistake again where they bring Gavin Bartholomew, a tight end, throw into a defensive tackle on the 1-yard line on 3rd and short. Julian Duggar will be in there because he's a dual threat. When he goes into the game, you have to protect the quarterback run, but he is a definition of a gamer, a guy who had very limited reps, but showed a lot of great qualities that earned him the quarterback 2 spot. And I think that he's going to be able to take that next step, and that personnel will be in there. I would expect that they'll have a heavy package, more offensive linemen, 2 tight end sets, but then you'll have that really good option of where they're in the shotgun. They're in the shotgun. You'll have your running back right next to you, preferably a Desmond Reed, a guy that's in there to where, hey, I can use Julian Duggar as a guy who runs it forward, boom, it snapped, and he just runs forward immediately. Desmond Reed can help push him in there. You'll have 2 tight end sets, a heavier overload that's there. Also, if you don't want to run it to him, you have an RPO, you hand it off. If Julian Duggar doesn't take it, it's handed off to Desmond Reed or another back that's currently there. And then you have your 2 tight ends split out immediately, run different routes or a delay route, or they have a top over route, which comes across the field up top, comes across, or into the corner of the end zone. I think that's where they're going to go. And I think that they really missed that last year where, you didn't want to do that. First off, you couldn't do it with Nate Yarnell. He was not, he's a big guy at 6'7", but certainly not built like a big guy. So you're never scared he was going to run. You certainly weren't going to hand it off at that point because it was too predictable. So you wanted to throw it, and it made it too predictable. But you have a guy like Derek Davis who can come in there at times if he's a bigger back, or they go into the portal. I think that's where they are. I really, you would hopefully like to see, but I have not heard anything that has suggested that they'll do an under the center play like a tush push, which, I think they should have regardless. Any offense should have it, but I feel like in the defense of what Cade Bell's probably thinking, he wants less of a snap infraction or a missed exchange under center because they're not. Because think about it, the majority of the game, they're not under center. God forbid you're on the 1 yard line, you have a snap, you have a bad snap, and then when you turn the ball over at the 1 yard line or it's a touchback, you would absolutely hate to see that. I think that from what my understanding is, they're going to stay in the shotgun, but Julian Duggar will be that guy who really takes the fold on that. And they probably bring in a bigger back, a guy who can really solidify that. They can hand it off, or be able to use Julian Duggar to where he can take a quarterback draw on the outside, draw up the middle, or utilize him to where they're able to throw the football. You have 2 tight end sets, which would be really, you'd have a 21 personnel or a 12 personnel to where you have 1 running back, 2 tight ends, and then you have 1 wide receiver on the outside, which would be really a good matchup overall. But they have to use a guy who's willing to run the football. That's the only way that it works. And also, too, you want to be able to make sure you have offensive linemen who can actually block and make sure to get you 1 yard push, at least a 1 yard push. That has to be the difference maker from last year. That's one thing that we didn't see last year. A lot of guys not getting a push. I expect there to be a lot of guys now this year who get that push. A Jeff Percy, a Kendall Stanley, Keith Guvia is your old school offensive lineman who loves to get aggressive in the run game. Ryan Bayer now at right tackle, where I think he's more comfortable. B.J. Williams now in his 3rd year. You hope to see it this year. So appreciate the question. And of course, appreciate the super chat, guys. As always, when you have a super chat, we push you always right to the top and we get you into that comment section. So Brian, beyond thankful. Thank you again. Adam, used Duggar like Florida did with Tebow on the short yardage. I agree 100%. And that's actually a great example there too. Under Urban Meyer, they really went under center with Tim Tebow. They were having him in the shotgun and being able to use him as an RPO specialist because you had to guard both, which is a good option there. It makes sense. Now, going into the second topic, how can the offense improve in year 2 under Cade Bell? And we've talked a little bit about it in terms of how and what we want to see. Number one, what you can do is look in the mirror. Cade Bell, how can you be a better coordinator? Don't get cute. Prime example, you look at the West Virginia game. 4th and 1, we're on our own 45. We're on our own 45-yard line, and we run this crazy-looking trick play that was just not designed correctly. You're thinking outside the box. It doesn't work, and you turn the ball over on downs. What happens then? That's right before the half. West Virginia gets the ball. They don't score a touchdown, but they hit a field goal. So now instead of having it 17-14, where you're punting the football, you probably go into the half up 17-14. You give the ball to West Virginia in great field position. You turn the ball over. You allow West Virginia to get 3 points. Now you go into halftime 17-17 instead of being up 17-14. That type of shit can't happen. The bowl game. You can't have you're at the 1 yard line, at the half yard line, and you bring in a tight end to throw to a defensive tackle because you're trying to get cute. You don't want to see those plays. You have the players that you can certainly use right then and there to win that football game. Now, I understand the bowl game because we had so many guys missing. I get it. I understand to that extent. That makes a lot of sense. But it makes a lot of sense. But there's certain plays that you want to see Cade Bell do a better job at. And understanding the down and distance, understanding the situation. Now, Eli Holstein on a number of different plays last year. I mean, we'd have a 3rd and 15, 3rd and 16, and they would gain 13, 14 yards and make it 4th and manageable. That's great. But you want to keep it into an understanding of, hey, here's what my team's really, really good at. Okay, here's what my team's good at, and here's how we're going to get better from there. Don't do anything crazy. Sometimes offensive coordinators, while I think Cade Bell is actually a good offensive coordinator, and I think he's going to show that again this year with a healthy roster in more depth, you want to avoid those plays where you're just looking at yourself going, what the hell are we doing? So that's the first one. Evaluate yourself and become a better offensive coordinator. Number 2, the health of the team is truly important. I think that if this offensive line truly stays healthy this year and Eli Holstein stays healthy, we keep him upright, this team can truly take it to new heights. I truly believe it, because when you watch the tape, the talent's there. But now you have more talent that understands the offense, understands the scheme. The coaches understand the players understand the coaches, and there's more camaraderie there. There's more understanding there. And I think that it's important to, when you're throwing yourself out there, you want to make sure the players know what they're doing. And I think that now when you got more depth, you look at the wide receiver room, Kenny Johnson should get more touches this year. Okay, we're going to miss a guy like Kanate Mumfield, who I think was really good and underutilized. But Kenny Johnson, a guy there. Deuce Spann, Andy Jean, Kateris Blue Hicks, Tyreek Robinson, Raphael Poppy Williams, CJ Lee, guys that it's now clicking, and we know what to expect, to where you can start getting into more hardcore schematics with the actual players and less thinking. But injuries are a major factor. The players have to understand what the coordinator is trying to call. That is a major factor. The players have to be in the same headspace as the coordinator, and that starts with the quarterback, starts with the running backs and the wide receivers, understanding what's being called. And lastly, for number 3, for the offense to be better, and in retrospect, it's probably number 1 importance. The offensive line has got to be aggressive this year. It has got to push. It has got to create the push up front. I've said it numerous of times, whether it's in college or it's in the NFL, the offensive line and the defensive line are the 2 most important aspects. You can have a great quarterback, but if you can't block for him and you can't protect him, it doesn't matter what quarterback you have. It doesn't matter what kind of shit he can do through the air, because he won't have time. You need to have time to throw it down the football field. You need to have time. But also in the run game, you need to push people around. You got to play bully ball at times. And I think there was times last year that Pitt couldn't do that, and Pitt was having major issues with it, and it was tough to watch at times. That can't happen this year. If you want to be successful, win 9, 10, 11 games, you have to dominate up front. A team that really has taken a hold of that mantra up front on the defensive line and offensive line, in my opinion, who's going to be really good this year, is Georgia Tech. Brent Key has truly recruited the way you want to recruit up front. And that's why they should have beaten now their quarterback. Now, they've done a great job up front in the offensive line and defensive line. I think their quarterback is extremely average, Haynes King. He's a great runner. They can run the football, but for God's sakes, I mean, the passing portion of his game is truly lacking, which is why I don't think he's a very high prospect when it comes into not this year's draft, but next year's draft. Pitt has its passer. Now you need to be aggressive up front. Jeff Percy, a former 4-star recruit. Ryan Bayer, a former 4-star recruit. They're up front. Kendall Stanley, an all AAC conference player, all first-team AAC conference player, American Conference. Those guys are there. Keith Guvia jumps up here now. Lyndon Cooper, second year in the system. BJ Williams continues to have that raw talent. We want to see him take that next step this year where, hey, he now shows he's that NFL caliber player we know he can be. That's where it's at. And then same thing with Jackson Brown and Isaiah Montgomery, who are right there battling for those positions. But the offensive line has got to get fury. You got to truly play the game and have the mindset of a Bill Freilich, where you truly embrace and love violence. Absolutely maul the shit out of people. That's what you want to see up front on both sides of the football. And we've seen it more on the defensive side of the football with like a Jalen Twyman, a Rashad Weaver, Patrick Jones, Kalijah Cansey, Aaron Donald. I mean, you're looking at those guys up front that just were absolute freaks of nature and just loved violence and just loved moving people and just absolutely just bewildering people. And on the offensive line, you had those Dorian Johnsons, those Brian O'Neills, Adam Bisnawati. You had a number of guys. I mean, even in those old school days, you were just like, damn, they were just moving people. I mean, it just, Mike McGlynn back in the day, Mike McGlynn, you had them. You had Pinkston from out of Baldwin. I mean, you look at those guys from top to bottom. It was like murderer's row. They were just beating the hell out of people. That's what you want to see. That's the offensive line that you want to see on a consistent basis. So that's my opinion. Bell needs to figure out a scheme to defeat cover 2 and cover 3. WRW Pitt, I mean, I disagree. I think that there were guys that were there. I think guys that were open, and we certainly missed those guys. I mean, you can go back and look at the tape. Eli Holstein certainly had his days of where he looked, like a Heisman Trophy winner, and then there were days like, damn, okay, we missed that guy. Or because the protection broke down, we couldn't find those guys. But they're there. If you go back and watch the tape, they're there. There were times that cover 2 and cover 3 were certainly holding us back. The Cal game was the real deficiator, I think. The Cal game kind of exposed it a little bit. But to your point, you're talking about cover 2 and cover 3. Who else ran cover 2 and cover 3? Clemson did. We threw for 350 yards with Nate Yarnell. It's not the scheme. The scheme shows it works. The scheme is there. It's understanding you need to have time, and guys need to find guys that are open. The quarterbacks need to find guys that are open and understand schematically where the ball needs to go. So the scheme certainly works. And again, appreciate Brian Thompson for the super chat as always. Make a super chat, we'll get you up on the screen. So thank you so much as always. Let's see here. The final note I have here. Oh, yes. So obviously after spring, from what my understanding is, when it comes to the portal, I would expect Pitt to go into the portal, look for number one. I think their number one look is going to be for a tight end, another tight end to come in and compete with Jake Overman. I think that Jake Renda and Malachi Thomas can be really two guys that can extend the field and be really good, but you want more of a veteran presence and a guy that can really team up with Jake Overman and have two good options, and then have two guys that are younger and you can rotate them in and get them experience when you need to, and not rely on young guys to produce at a high level so early on in the season. I think they'll look for a tight end. I think they're going to look for another offensive lineman just for depth purposes, a guy who can come in here and really compete for that next spot, especially on the interior offensive line. And Rocco Spindler certainly would have been a center or guard at that position. A bigger running back, a bigger back to rotate and supplement in for a Desmond Reed, again, All-American, but you want to take touches off of him. Jules Goff, they're a lot like the same. You want that bigger back to come in and really take a load off of those two guys and really have a change of pace guy. So you'd like to have him in there. And then potentially a cornerback. I think you've got Rashad Battle in there. He's obviously going through an injury right now, but Rashad Battle, Taman Lynham, Rashawn Murray, those are really your top three guys right there. Shadarian Harrison, a younger guy who hasn't hit the field yet. You're really looking for one more guy in that group that can really create a spark and really create a time to where if he needs to go into the game, he can play. I think it'd be good to get Shadarian Harrison into that rotation, get him in there and get him time when he needs to get those repetitions he needs. But you don't want to rely on a guy who has no experience at all whatsoever. You want to go with a guy that has some type of experience. And I think right now Pitt has three. You'd like to go with four, and especially if someone gets injured, you got to have a little bit of depth pieces at the cornerback position. You don't want to be really thin there, and I think Pitt's going to have to pay when they go to the portal afterwards. Let's see here. The one comment here I saw early on from a WVU fan that was in here. What was pretty crazy early on, I was told, as you can imagine, this is a football show, but West Virginia has had one hell of a week. First, they get left out of the tournament. They're basically, Pitt from last year. They get left out of the tournament, and then Darian DeVries leaves West Virginia. People thought it would be Iowa. Iowa does not have the NIL space up there. They're certainly not invested into basketball. But you know who is? The Indiana Hoosiers. All right, the Hoosiers. Who are we rooting for? The Hoosiers. And let me tell you, it's a big space up there. He got I think from what I'm hearing, he probably got like a 6-year deal, which solidifies him up there. They're not going to get rid of him at all. I think he'll be pretty successful up there. He'll have double, if not triple, the NIL money. Indiana over a place like West Virginia, where they were just getting over $3 million from what I saw from recent reports. Obviously, a major meltdown. Mountaineer Paul was certainly having himself a day. He was really going through the coping mechanism early on, from what Pitt fans were saying in the chat here, talking about how he was saying, at least we're not Pitt. Well, last time I checked, Pitt and West Virginia face each other this year, and Pitt beat the ever-loving brakes off of West Virginia. I mean, absolutely beat the shit out of them. So, I mean, Jeff Capel beat your ass. I mean, so you could say Pitt didn't play well, but they beat you pretty good. And then Pitt beat you at football. But hey, I understand from the mindset of West Virginia, always looking to keep up with the big brother, Pitt, obviously, and we really appreciate that. And I know they're going to be preparing for their Super Bowl coming up on 9/13. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've not renewed your season tickets, make sure you do that. Obviously, for this year, Notre Dame comes to town. Miami comes to town. Notre Dame. Yeah, what did I say? Notre Dame, Miami, Boston College. They're all coming to town. But I know West Virginia will certainly be getting ready for their Super Bowl. They were 0-2 last year, losing to both bigger programs. Joey Deli, we'll get to your question here in a second. But quite the day for the West Virginia Mountaineers, man. I mean, that just absolutely horrible end of the year. They lose to a Colorado team that I think had 4 wins in the Big 12 conference. They lose that game. They get left out of the NCAA tournament. Now, Darian DeVries leaves the West Virginia Mountaineers. Again, I didn't see, guys, obviously, I don't watch Mountaineer Paul, so I could care less what he's doing over there. But I heard it was pretty hilarious, the coping mechanism that, he feels better, that they're in a better position than Pitt. Well, clearly you're not in a better position than Pitt, because your head coach left you in the dust for the Indiana Hoosiers, a better program with more money, that's for sure. So that's always funny to see that they're still comparing themselves to Pitt, but it's understandable for where they are. What does the Pitt call it? CB Joey, what does the cornerback depth chart look like? Obviously, Rashad Battle, but who's other starters? Harrison. Joey, so we're just talking about that right here. Rashad Battle is recovering from, I believe, a knee injury that he had, a knee surgery, one of the 19 surgeries that players had this year. But Rashad Battle, Taman Lynham, the Nebraska transfer from last year, he's going to be back again. And then Rashawn Murray, who has really stepped up so far this camp. He's having a great camp so far. 6'2" cornerback, was a Division II All-American. The question always with those guys is, does the talent level really stack up to the Division I level? So far it has. I think we're probably not going to find out if it does till we start facing more Power 4 teams, obviously, when it comes to the actual season, the regular season in the fall. But he's done his job. And right now, your top 3 at this point is, Taman Lynham, Rashawn Murray, and Rashad Battle, with Shadarian Harrison filling in at 4th. And I think that after spring camp, and I stress this enough, when you go into the portal after spring camp, it's going to cost you a lot more money. The first portal season, you're going to get guys for better deals and better cracks at it. Now, you're really going to have to dive into the pocketbook, which I expect Pitt to do. I expect them to go after another cornerback to add more depth, to get a 4th guy in that rotation. Shadarian Harrison would now be a 5th guy. That would be a really good depth piece. You don't want to throw Shadarian Harrison into a game where he hasn't had a lot of experience, if any experience at all. So you want one more cornerback from the portal, which would be a really good fit for them. And then you also want, you would like another piece when it comes to the tight end room, to compete with Jake Overman or to complement Jake Overman. They really have one tight end for sure right now. Jake Renda and Malachi Thomas can be good over time, but you want another depth piece there. You don't want just 3 tight ends. You would like another one to go in there and really give yourself that time. Boozy Turner, the running back, the true freshman. There's been a lot of good talk about him. I think the running back room, that's great. I think they'll have another potentially 3 guys right there. I think he'll get some time at the running back position. That's great. I just personally think that Pitt should be able to go out there and find a bigger back. If you want to go with smaller guys, that's great. I don't have a problem with it. I mean, Desmond Reed is a guy that was an All-American last year, but you need to have that depth in there. You need to have that depth. That's you need to have the depth from top to bottom, and I think that it has to portray itself in there. You have to grab it. But personally, again, Joey, I would like a bigger back, at least one guy that can really offset the smaller dudes in there. But which again, it's Cade Bell's system. He loves speed. I mean, it worked out for numerous guys that are in there. So I'm not going to question him, but I would like a bigger back. Steven, who can't Pitt lose in the spring because it will happen? I mean, they didn't lose anybody. They didn't lose anybody last year in the portal that they desperately needed. I mean, when it comes to guys that can't lose, obviously you can't lose, your quarterback, Eli Holstein. You can't lose Kenny Johnson. I think he's a guy, especially your wide receiver one. You don't want to lose any of your offensive linemen. I'm trying to think who else is there. You certainly don't want to lose a Francis Breu. That's another name that's there. But, I mean, Steven, like last year, we didn't lose anybody that didn't play last year. I mean, so I don't know. What do you mean it will happen? I mean, there will be guys that hit the portal because they're not in the 2 deep. They got to move on. I mean, if they're not on the 2 deep, why would you not help them find another place to play? It happens every year. There's guys that are not on the 2 deep that can certainly find a better place to play. I don't have a problem with it. All right, we're coming up on the hour mark. I don't see any more super chats. If you have a super chat, I would say dive into it right now because we'll go over the comment really quick. So we're coming up on the hour point, but I don't see any more super chats. Again, Brian Thompson, I appreciate you so much with the super chat as always. And from what I can tell here, we talked about that, the West Virginia Mountaineers and their coping mechanism they're going through right now. Let's see here. Went over that one. Appreciate that one. Yep, so it looks like it should be it. Guys, thank you again, and thank you so much for your support of the K Collection and all the sponsors with Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen, Colonial Beer, Thompson Attorneys with Brian Thompson, Thompson Law Group. Thank you so much. And the K Collection, as always, with Austin Kitchen, the coffee brand. Again, the AK Espresso batch, my favorite right here. So thank you guys for supporting all three of the sponsors that support Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. Again, Colonial Beer, Thompson Law Group with Brian Thompson, and of course, Austin Kitchen's brand, the K Collection, the coffee brand. So thank you guys so much. Guys, as always and forever, hail to Pitt and hail to the ACC. We'll have a next show, and thank you for tuning in to where we cover the ACC, Pitt football, and conference realignment. Guys, as always and forever, hail to Pitt, and I'll see you next time.